The house was quiet. Too quiet. I kissed her on the forehead, just like I had 1,000 times before. Her eyes fluttered closed, and she mumbled a good night, already drifting off. I watched her for a moment, the blankets pulled up to her chin, the soft rhythm of her breathing like a metronome to the stillness of our room. I backed away slowly, my feet muffled against the carpet as I reached for my jacket and slipped my car keys into my pocket. I don't even remember closing the door behind me. The night air was cool and sharp, filling my lungs with something that almost felt like relief. My hands found the steering wheel almost on instinct, and I sat there for a moment, engine purring, headlights washing the pavement in yellow light. I told myself I just needed to drive, clear my head, maybe circle the block a few times and come back. But as soon as I shifted into gear, the wheel seemed to turn on its own, guiding me out of my quiet suburban neighborhood and onto the empty stretches of road that led downtown. I shouldn't have been surprised by the familiarity of it all. The way the streetlights flickered in patches, the uneven cracks in the asphalt that jostled the car just enough to remind me I was still alive. It wasn't the first time I had driven these roads. Late nights when sleep wouldn't come, I would find myself here, gliding through the shadows, watching the city breathe its last sighs before dawn. But tonight was different. There was a weight pressing down on me, a restlessness that pulsed, just beneath my skin. I kept driving, the streets growing darker and narrower as I moved further away from the places I knew. The houses turned into warehouses, the convenience stores into bars with neon signs that buzzed in the silence. I thought about turning back, making a U-turn and crawling back into bed before she noticed I was gone. But I didn't. My hands gripped, the wheel a little tighter as I turned onto a street I barely remembered. The lights were sparser here, the air thick with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I slowed down, the hum of the engine softening as I rolled past rows of shuttered windows and flickering signs. And then I saw him. He was leaning against a lamppost, the orange glow casting shadows across his sharp features. A cigarette hung from his lips, the tip flaring bright red as he took a long, unhurried drag. His eyes met mine, dark and unblinking, as if he'd been waiting. I pulled the car to a stop without really thinking about it, my hands moving on instinct alone. For a moment, neither of us moved. He stood there, unmoving, smoke curling from his mouth, watching me with a sort of calm curiosity that made my chest tighten. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know why I was there, but the urge to roll down the window was too strong, to resist. I reached for the button, the glass sliding down with a faint hum, and the cool night air spilled in. Looking for company? His voice was smooth, casual, as if he'd asked this question 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. I swallowed, my hand still resting on the wheel. Maybe, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He took another drag, exhaling slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. How much? I asked, and the words spilled out before I could stop them. I wasn't sure I even wanted to. He smirked, the kind of smile that hinted at secrets. Depends on what you're looking for. I hesitated, my knuckles white against the leather of the steering wheel. I could still turn back, I told myself. I could hit the gas, drive home, slide back into bed, and pretend I had just gone for a drive to clear my head. But I didn't. Get in, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Adam didn't hesitate. He crushed the cigarette beneath his boot and stepped forward, slipping into the passenger seat like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The door closed with a solid click, sealing us off from the rest of the world. I pulled away from the curb, and as the city lights blurred past us, I could feel it, the boundary shifting, the line I was crossing fading into the distance behind. Me, the silence stretched between us like a taut string, vibrating with tension. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could feel the leather creak beneath my palms. Adam sat beside me, his gaze fixed out the window, unbothered, calm. His fingers tapped a lazy rhythm against his thigh, the only movement in the stillness that hung between us. I stole glances at him, half expecting him to change his mind, to laugh and say it was all a mistake, but he didn't. He just sat there, waiting, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. The streets blurred past us, darker now as we moved away from the main roads and into the quieter corners of the city. I knew these roads, by instinct, places people didn't talk about, where privacy was a commodity and questions weren't asked. My heart hammered in my chest, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me like a vice. I should have turned back. I could have, but I didn't. The motel came into view, its neon sign flickering in uneven pulses, casting a dull red glow over the cracked pavement. Evergreen Suites, it read, though the name promised more than it delivered. I pulled into the side entrance, the car humming as we approached the private garages that lined the back of the lot. They were designed for discretion. Thick metal doors that shut out prying eyes, each room with its own hidden entrance. I slowed to a stop, the engine idling for a heartbeat before I killed it. We sat there in the stillness, the world muffled by the thick walls around us. I felt the urge to say something, anything, but words wouldn't come. I looked at him, waiting for a reaction. He just turned to me and nodded, almost imperceptibly, like he was giving me permission to move forward. The gate clattered shut behind us with a metallic clang, sealing us off from the world outside. My breathing was shallow, fingers trembling, as I fumbled with the keys. I couldn't look at him. Not yet. Adam stepped out of the car first, his movements fluid, practiced. He didn't wait for me. He just walked to the door and paused, hands in his pockets, head tilted back to watch the stars peeking through the smog. I followed, my footsteps heavy against the concrete. He slid his hand into his jacket, pulling out a single key and fitting it into the lock. It turned smoothly and the door swung open with a low creak. The room was exactly what I expected. Dim lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly, casting uneven shadows across the walls. The carpet was worn, the bed neatly made with thin white sheets, corners tucked military tight. A nightstand stood next to it, a cheap lamp casting a soft, orange glow. The air was heavy with the scent of industrial cleaner and something sweeter. Cologne, maybe, or the lingering trace of someone else's night. Adam didn't wait for me to adjust. He stepped inside, his jacket sliding off his shoulders and landing on the lone chair by the door. I stood in the entrance, hands still shaking, feet rooted to the spot. It felt real now. Too real. "You coming in?" he asked, his voice low, calm. I swallowed hard, nodding more to myself than to him. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a dull thud. My hands found my pockets, fingers clenching and unclenching as I tried to ground myself. Adam was already unbuttoning his shirt, his movements unhurried, casual, like this was just another night. I watched him, unable to move, my breath catching in my throat as he slipped the fabric from his shoulders and let it drop. His skin was pale in the half-light, lean muscle stretching beneath it. He paused, catching my gaze, and for the first time, I saw the hint of a smile. "No pressure," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to." But I did. God, I did. My hands were clumsy, fumbling with the buttons of my shirt, my fingers catching on the fabric as I tried to unfasten them. Adam watched me patiently, his eyes never leaving mine, that same gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When I finally shrugged off the last layer, he stepped forward, his hands reaching out to rest on my shoulders. The contact was light, barely there, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I tensed, breath held, waiting for the flood of guilt or regret. But it didn't come. Just a quiet acceptance, a soft release of everything I had held back for so long. His hands moved slowly, trailing down my arms, fingertips grazing my skin, like he was memorizing it. He leaned in, his breath warm against my neck, and I closed my eyes, letting the tension slip away. His touch was confident, sure, and I realized in that moment that I didn't want him to stop. No judgment, no words, just silence, and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The barriers came down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left between us. And in that small room, hidden from the world, I stopped pretending. The hum of the engine filled, the silence between us stretching out like a thread pulled too tight. Adam sat beside me, his body angled toward the window, eyes fixed on the blur of streetlights flickering past. His hands were tucked into his jacket pockets, shoulders relaxed, like he'd just finished another day at work. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, fingers stiff from tension. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. What could I even say? Thank you? Goodbye? None of it seemed right. The motel felt like a fever dream, already, slipping away as the city lights swallowed us whole. I could still feel him, his touch lingering on my skin, the press of his hands firm and unyielding. It was like my body refused to forget. I tried not to look at him, but I caught glimpses of his reflection in the window. Sharp jawline, eyes half-lidded, cigarette tucked behind his ear. He looked peaceful. I was anything but. My hands were slick with sweat, my heartbeat thrumming like a drum in my ears. Every mile that passed felt like I was pulling further from something I couldn't quite name. We pulled up to the spot where I'd picked him up just hours before. I slowed to a stop, the car idling as the silence stretched between us. He turned, to look at me, his eyes meeting mine with an expression I couldn't read. Calm, maybe even a little amused. "See you around," he said, voice low and unhurried. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He stepped out, the door shutting behind him with a solid click that echoed in the small space. He didn't look back. He just walked away, hands stuffed in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the chill of the night. I watched him, until he disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the shadows. My fingers were still wrapped around the steering wheel, locked in place. It was only then that I realized I hadn't exhaled since he left. I let the breath out slowly, watching the condensation spread across the windshield before it faded. Caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked different, sharper, more awake. I stared at myself, trying to find the version of me that had pulled out of the driveway just hours ago. He was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed. The drive back to my house felt longer than before. The street stretched out endlessly before me. Each turn, each flicker of light, was a reminder of what I'd just done. What I couldn't take back. When I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed ahead, dark and silent. I cut the engine, the sudden quiet almost deafening. I sat there for a while, staring at the front door, half expecting it to fly open and for her to be standing there, waiting, arms crossed, eyes blazing. But it didn't. Everything stayed still. I stepped out of the car, closing the door quietly behind me, the sound muffled against the night. The air was heavy, thick with silence. My feet barely made a sound as I climbed the steps, keys slipping into the lock with a soft click. Inside, everything was as I had left it. The living room light was off, the hallway dark except for the glow of the clock on the microwave. I moved through the shadows, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Her bedroom door was cracked open, just enough for me to see her outline beneath the sheets, curled up, breathing softly. I stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, trying to let the image ground me. It didn't. I slipped into the bathroom, shutting the door quietly behind me. The mirror stared back at me, accusing and unblinking. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water over my face, watching it drip back into the sink. I wanted to wash it away, all of it. But the feeling of his hands, the press of his mouth, it clung to me like a second skin. I scrubbed harder, the water running clear but feeling anything but clean. When I finally crawled into bed, she didn't stir. Her breathing stayed steady, her back turned toward me, oblivious to the storm raging just inches away. I stared at the ceiling, fingers curled into my palms, feeling every nerve in my body still humming with leftover adrenaline. It was just once, I whispered to myself, the words brittle and hollow. Just once. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. Days blended together in shades of gray. The alarm clock would buzz, I would rise, and the routine would begin. Coffee brewing, toast popping up with the same mechanical reliability. My wife would shuffle into the kitchen, still in her robe, hair tied back, offering me a tired smile and a peck on the cheek. It was always the same. I would smile back, pretend that everything was just as it always had been. But it wasn't. I found myself drifting through conversations, nodding at the right moments, mumbling responses when prompted. Her voice would fade into the background, the clinking of silverware during breakfast like distant chimes underwater. She would talk about her day, grocery lists, PTA meetings, the neighbor's new car, and I would watch her lips move, barely processing the words. All I could hear was silence. At work, I was a ghost. My hands would move on autopilot, typing reports, answering emails, shaking hands with clients. I laughed when expected, spoke when necessary, but everything felt detached, like I was watching someone else move through my life. The hours ticked by, my mind wandering back to that room, the dim lights, the heavy scent of industrial cleaner, the feel of his hands on my skin. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, a lapse that didn't mean anything. But the memory stayed, lingering like smoke in the back of my mind. It haunted me in the quiet moments. When I stood at the copier at work, when I brushed my teeth in the dull light of the bathroom mirror, when I lay in bed beside her, our backs turned to each other. Nights were the worst. I would lie there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the seconds until dawn. I would hear her breathing beside me, slow and even, while my own chest rose and fell in uneven stutters. My hands would clench and unclench, nerves firing, muscles tight. I told myself it would fade, that it was just a trick of the mind, but it didn't. It grew stronger, sharper, until it was all I could think about. And then, it happened. I was downtown, grabbing a quick lunch before heading back to the office. The cafe was bustling, the low hum of conversation filling the room. I had just stepped up to the counter, ordered my usual black coffee, when I saw him. Adam. He was across the room, leaning against the counter, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He looked the same. Lean frame, sharp jawline, that easy confidence that seemed to draw eyes wherever he went. His hand rested casually on the countertop, his smile soft and unhurried. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat. I turned away, fumbling for my wallet, fingers slipping against the leather as I handed over a crumpled bill. My hands shook, my mind a swirl of questions and panic. What was he doing here? Why now? Did he see me? I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the barista as she handed me my change. But I couldn't help it. My eyes flickered back across the room just for a second. He was looking right at me. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, everything fell away. The noise of the cafe, the smell of burnt coffee grounds, the people bustling around us, it all vanished. His expression didn't change. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just watched me with that same calm indifference, as if he had been expecting me. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my hands clutching the warm paper cup like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Adam raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. I swallowed hard, feeling the room close in around me. My heart pounded in my ears, and I thought I might be sick. I should have walked away. I knew I should have, but I didn't. He pushed away from the counter, his movements slow, deliberate. I watched him slip through the crowd, weaving his way toward the exit. He didn't look back, just kept walking, his hands tucked into his pockets, head tilted slightly down. He stopped at the door, pausing for just a second, before glancing back at me. He didn't smile, didn't beckon, just stood there, waiting. I felt my body move before my mind registered it, my feet carrying me forward, the cup of coffee still clutched in my hand. The door swung shut behind us, sealing us off from the noise and the light. He was there, just a few feet away, his eyes studying me, searching for something I wasn't sure I had. "Hey," he said, his voice as steady as I remembered. "Hey," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. He nodded, that slight smile, tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Me neither," I whispered, my throat tight. But I was here, and so was he. The rain came down in sheets, splattering against the windshield as I pulled into the lot. It pattered in rhythmic taps, sliding down the glass in tiny rivulets that blurred the neon glow of the hotel sign. I turned off the engine, the sudden silence heavy and suffocating. My fingers were still wrapped around the steering wheel, knuckles pale, palms damp with sweat. I had told myself it was just one time. A mistake, a lapse in judgment. But as I watched the rain smear across the glass, I knew that had been a lie. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, the cool metal sending a shiver up my arm. Adam was waiting under the awning, cigarette balanced between his lips, shoulders hunched against the downpour. He glanced up as I approached, flicking the cigarette to the ground and crushing it beneath his boot. His eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe understanding. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the entrance. I followed, the rain soaking into my jacket as we crossed the pavement. The lobby was empty, dimly lit, smelling faintly of lemon-scented cleaner. Adam led the way, hands in his pockets, footsteps soundless against the worn carpet. We didn't speak as we climbed the narrow staircase, the air growing warmer and heavier with each step. Room 204. He slid the key into the lock, turning it with a practiced flick of his wrist. The door swung open, revealing a small room with a single bed and a window streaked with raindrops. The lamp on the nightstand cast a soft, amber glow, shadows pooling in the corners. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a heavy thud. Adam tossed his jacket onto the chair, turning to face me with that same unflinching gaze. He waited, patient and still, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. I swallowed, the tension thrumming between us like a live wire. I told myself I wouldn't do this again. I murmured, the words slipping out before I could catch them. Adam raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a half-smile. You always listen to yourself? I didn't answer. I couldn't. He took a step closer, and I felt my breath hitch, my hands flexing at my sides. His eyes never left mine, unblinking, steady. He reached out, fingers grazing my collar, tugging lightly. The buttons slipped free, one by one, the fabric parting under his touch. I watched his hands work, smooth and deliberate, until my shirt hung open, the cool air brushing against my skin. I shivered, but it wasn't from the cold. Adam's hands slipped under the fabric, palms warm and rough, sliding over my shoulders. My shirt fell to the floor with a whisper of fabric against carpet. He stepped closer, his chest brushing against mine, the heat of him seeping into my bones. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of rain and cigarettes. Still want to leave? He whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I opened my eyes, met his gaze. No. It was all I needed to say. He moved with practiced ease, his hands slipping to my waist, guiding me backward until my knees hit the edge of the bed. I sat down, hard, the mattress creaking beneath us. Adam followed, straddling my lap, his hands resting on my shoulders. His eyes searched mine for a moment, a flicker of something passing between us, unspoken, raw, real. I reached up, fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. His mouth found mine, warm and insistent, and everything else fell away. The rain pelted the window in steady rhythm, a heartbeat against the glass as our movements grew more urgent. My hands moved of their own accord, tracing the line of his back, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. We sank into the mattress, limbs entwined, the world narrowing to the space between us. There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty, just raw instinct, a connection that pulsed and burned and filled the spaces I hadn't realized were empty. His hands found mine, fingers interlocking, grounding me in the here and now. It wasn't just physical, it wasn't just release. It was something deeper, something that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Adam's eyes stayed locked on mine, unblinking, unwavering, as if he could see every crack and fissure in the walls I'd built around myself. And I let him. I let him see it all. We lay thereafter, the rain still tapping against the window, the room heavy with the scent of sweat and something sweeter. Acceptance, maybe. His head rested on my chest, the rise and fall of his breathing steady and sure. I stared at the ceiling, my hand absent-mindedly tracing patterns along his back, the weight of the moment settling over me like a blanket. I had told myself it would be the last time, but lying there, his warmth pressed against me, I knew it wouldn't be, not by a long shot. The house was still when I stepped inside, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and reminds you just how alone you really are. I slipped off my shoes at the door, careful not to make a sound. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dark and uninviting. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticking off seconds like it was counting down to something inevitable. I moved down the hall, my footsteps muffled against the carpet, and pushed open the bedroom door. She was there, already asleep, curled up on her side with the blankets pulled tight to her chin. Her hair splayed across the pillow, soft breaths rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders moved with each inhale, the way her hands were tucked under her cheek like she was holding on to something precious. I slipped out of my clothes quietly, the fabric whispering against my skin as I folded them neatly over the chair. It felt like a ritual, like slipping back into a role I was barely holding on to. I pulled back the covers, slid into bed beside her, careful not to disturb her sleep. The mattress dipped slightly under my weight, but she didn't stir. I lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the shadows dancing in patterns I couldn't quite make out. The room was dark, but I didn't close my eyes. I couldn't. The memory of him was too fresh, too raw. Adam's scent still clung to me. Cigarettes and rain and something deeper, something that made my skin prickle just thinking about it. I turned my head, watching her sleep. Her face was soft, peaceful, untouched by the storm that raged just inches away. My hand hovered above her shoulder, suspended in the air, fingers curled in indecision. I could reach out. I could touch her, pull her close, remind myself of the life we built, of the promises we made. But I didn't. I let my hand fall back onto the mattress, the space between us stretching wide and unbridgeable. I closed my eyes, but it only made things worse. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw him. Adam. His hands, his eyes, the way he looked at me without judgment or hesitation. I saw the rain streaking down the hotel window, the flicker of neon lights casting shadows across his skin. I felt his breath, his touch, the way he pulled me in like I belonged there. Like I belonged to him. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding, breath shallow. She shifted beside me, murmuring something under her breath before settling back into sleep. I stared up at the ceiling, jaw clenched, fingers digging into the sheets. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't supposed to feel more, but I did. I tried to shove it down, tried to drown it with routine, with morning coffee, rushed breakfasts, work that felt like an endless blur of emails and handshakes. But it wouldn't go away. It lingered, curling around the edges of my thoughts, slipping into the quiet moments when I least expected it. I would catch myself in the middle of conversations, nodding at the right times, smiling when expected. But I wasn't there. Not really. I was back in that room, rain tapping, against the glass, his hands on my skin. I was in his car, watching the lights streak past as he drove us somewhere away from judgment, away from eyes that would never understand. The realization hit me then, sharp and unyielding. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't sit at this dinner table, nodding at her stories, holding her hand, pretending that everything was the same. It wasn't. I wasn't. I turned onto my side, watching her sleep, her breaths even and untroubled. I envied her, envied the simplicity of her world. But I knew mine had changed. I could feel it in my bones, a gnawing sense that I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't turn back from. I reached out then, my fingers grazing the fabric of her nightgown. She murmured something again, a whisper lost to sleep, and I pulled my hand back, curling it into a fist. I lay there, my breath shaky, my mind unraveling thread by thread. I knew a choice was coming, one that would change everything. But for now, I closed my eyes and waited for morning, the space between us colder than I could bear. The rain drizzled softly against the window pane, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray and silver. I watched the droplets race each other down the glass, my hands wrapped around the warmth of the coffee cup in front of me. The cafe was quiet, the soft hum of conversation muffled by the steady patter of rain. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through me, grounding me in this moment. Across from me, Adam leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping idly against the table. He was watching me, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. He hadn't said much since we sat down, but he didn't have to. The silence between us felt full, heavy with something unspoken, something fragile, yet unyielding. "You look different," he said finally, his voice soft but certain. I raised an eyebrow, setting my cup down gently. "Different how?" He shrugged, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I don't know. Lighter, maybe." I chuckled, the sound unfamiliar to my own ears. "Lighter? I don't feel lighter." Adam's gaze held mine, unflinching. "That's because you haven't gotten used to it yet." I didn't have an answer to that. I just watched him, the rain casting fleeting shadows across his face. He seemed so sure, so steady, and for the first time, I wondered what it would be like to feel that way too. I glanced out the window, watching people hurry by under umbrellas, heads ducked, feet splashing through shallow puddles. I imagined myself out there, walking shoulder to shoulder with them, carrying the weight of what I'd left behind. But I wasn't out there. I was here. With him. I looked back at Adam, and his smile widened just a little. "Second thoughts?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. I shook my head slowly, surprising even myself. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "No second thoughts." He leaned back, stretching his arms over his head with a lazy sort of grace. "Good," he said simply, "because I wasn't planning on letting you leave." The rain continued to tap against the window, the world outside rushing by in a blur of movement and sound. But in here, everything felt still, solid, real. I took another sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest, settling in the spaces I hadn't realized were hollow. Adam watched me, his eyes steady, unblinking, waiting. I placed the cup back on the table, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly, the truth of it settling like a stone in my chest. His smile softened, and for a moment, the rain seemed to fade into the background, leaving just the two of us, suspended in this fleeting moment of something that finally felt real.